The biggest question I ask is, what's being done about this? And I wish I could say a lot's being done, but the truth is a little is, but not a lot nationally. Now, to the credit of some states and some politicians, some are trying, and I'll give them credit there, because I'll be honest, as a politician, it cannot be easy making a decision that's not going to be favourable to everyone, because what's going to happen here is whatever decision you make, there's a percentage of people that aren't going to like it, and you I hate to say it, to be a good leader, you have to make unpopular decisions. So someone I'm going to give credit to is actually the Premier of New South Wales, and it's Chris Minns. I'm not traditionally a conservative, I'm not traditionally a left-wing or Labor voter or someone that would probably sway that way, but like, credit's due where it's due. Like, this program he brought out, which is called Transport Orientated Development, will definitely help. So it's basically in the key pockets of Sydney, so it's particularly between the inner west and Parramatta. High density is going to be basically what's actually already been permitted there in some of the areas, not all, but that's going to increase density, increase dwelling, so that will definitely help. Look, locals aren't going to like it, but when we've got a crisis this bad, some things like this are going to have to be done, and I just say suck it up, because look, I don't like high rises being built in my backyard either, but I prefer someone to be living in a home than on the street just at the end of the day. So that's my personal opinion on it. This also includes some stations in the Central Coast, Newcastle and the Wollongong actual council regions, and actually I should say Lake Macquarie as well. Only a couple, but it will help there too. So I'll give you credit there, Mr. Chris Minns. You're at least trying to take some action, so credit's due where it's due. There is few issues though, and look, I cannot stand this present government. They have no idea what they're doing. You shouldn't be able to run a country if you've never run a business before, because you don't know how to run anything. You shouldn't be able to be a lifelong bureaucrat or a lifelong person in the unions, because you don't know how business runs either. You should have to have a real job and at least have some idea how to run a balance sheet. But there's things like this, terrible disincentives, how the new ute tax / SUV tax will actually impact Aussies. So what they did, this is in early 24, what they did was they increased taxes on large vehicles. And I asked people a very simple question. Yes, some people may say it's not that much. Why does it affect people? Any disincentive is going to naturally move people out of doing that. So I don't care whether it's $20 a year, or it's 20 grand a year. I don't care. Look, this is going to be more than that. It's probably going to be a couple of $100 to $1,000 probably a year, something like that. But naturally speaking, you want to incentivize people who can help the crisis. So I've asked people before, what's the biggest crisis? Nearly everyone says the housing crisis or cost of living. That's nearly everyone. The second thing I asked them then is, who solves that crisis? It's tradies and transport workers. So that's heavy vehicles. No one but heavy vehicles, right? And then I asked them, okay, and then what vehicles do they use? They use trucks and utes. But we're going to disincentivize that. So how does that even make sense? So that's another thing that's actually going on, which really pisses me off. But, the government does what they do. And, I don't understand how people still fall for this nonsense. Don't vote for these guys. They're terrible. I don't mean necessarily all state governments, but the federal government has done an awful job, awful job at the two main things, the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis. And this is one of the policies that's causing that. This is actually even worse in some locations. So I know I've mentioned federal government, so I'm actually going to go to state government now. So this is just an article off, I think it's the ABC from memory. I can't actually remember where I got off. It is the ABC actually. And where this comes from is Victorian government accused of unfair land taxes, couple slugged for granny flat housing elderly mother. So this couple decided, because the mother couldn't afford to live in her home, to slug this couple land tax because they were housing their mother in it. How does that even make sense? So they're actually helping the housing crisis, but the government says, we fucked up our economy so bad because we couldn't run a sausage sizzle, so we're just going to tax you because we don't know what we're doing, we need to recoup funds. That is not what you do. And the crazy thing about this is, I'm not mentioning this couple, but there are literally people in states like this, and it's the same as like California and the United States, who will still vote for the same party despite how bad it's got. If you've had someone in charge for any longer than 5 years and things have got worse, They have no excuses to say anything. I actually would even go as far as saying, even if a government has had charge of 2 years and things have not got better, it is 100% their fault. You cannot say, we inherited this budget, it is the previous party's fault or anything like that, okay? Some governments that are should I say centre left of the line or centre right have done good jobs, either side of the line, but this Victorian government has done a terrible job, and no one can doubt that. And the people who vote for this, you are the problem for things like this, because you are not considering what has happened. When a government comes into power, you inherit a budget and you know most of what's being gone. It's actually published. Sure, there might be a few expenses, but you can't use that excuse for any longer than 2 years. You have the power to change it and at least make it better. So things like this is appalling. You're actually... You should, in my opinion, if it was up to me, I think they should sue the state government for doing a bad job, because you swear to oath to actually act in the best interest of the people, and that's not doing this. This is actually, in my opinion, Orwellian power, and this is actual theft of money for this poor family here. So this is what I mean by terrible governance. The other thing I'd like to say is as well, the government likes to say, and they'll continue to say this, that we've solved the inflation crisis, because our inflation has dropped to 2.8% or under 3% or whatever it is, around 2.5 to 3%, right? Now, let's be honest about this. What the media, and I don't know how the media doesn't press them about this, and I wish someone like me or someone who actually looked at the true statistics of it would, but inflation is made up of two key things, and one is tradables inflation, the other is non-tradables inflation. So the easiest way to describe this is tradables inflation is inflation that is influenced by the international economy or other nations around the world. So it's basically international inflation. That's the easiest way to describe it, because it is affected by global currencies, is affected by global trade, it's affected by global prices of other things, right? Non-tradables inflation is basically domestic inflation, right? Easiest way to describe it. So if you look at the graph here, and this is off the ABS, so I'm not making anything up, you will see here, tradables inflation, right, is literally under 1% at the moment, and this is taken in the September quarter, mind you, so it's probably even better here. I took this screenshot a little while ago just to demonstrate how bullshit what they're talking about is going on, and you'll see longer term, actually, for the most part, the Australian actual inflation is actually, non-tradable inflation has actually been above the tradables inflation. So who solved the inflation crisis? More so, it's the international community. Our inherent inflation is over 4%, roughly still, right? So it's not our government claiming that they've solved it. It's actually the internationals that have done the better job. So this is what the news should focus on. Like, they need to press them on these sorts of things. Like, they must be, like, well, obviously the ABC is funded by the actual government, but like these other actual media corporations, they need to press them on these sorts of things, because this is the truth of where inflation's at in our Australian economy. I wish it was the other way around. I wish we had non-tradables at where the tradables is, and then the tradables was they swap places. Tradables is high, because that would mean our government's doing better than the average. But the truth is they're doing significantly worse. But no one asks them this question, and no one presses them on this, and that's what we should be pressing them on. Anyway, let's get into probably one of the most frustrating things of this whole thing, and I cannot emphasize how pissed off this makes me, but we have a mass immigration crisis in Australia, in a housing crisis. We have a mass immigration for no absolute reason. Now look, I'm from an immigrant background, both of my parents. So my father is a Vietnamese immigrant. He came over legally, and he came over originally after waiting a few years in line to actually get into Australia, right? There's no fast visa approval, there's none of that at all. And he waited his time, eventually got in, and all was good and well, right? But at the moment, we have a housing crisis. We're about 250,000 dwellings short, and we've just brought in close to 600,000 people from overseas. And we are dwelling short, and we're a long way short of our housing targets, and then we do that. Do you think that's a good idea? What's even worse is when you look at like where the actual trend's going, and this is just off Matusik with Treasury and actual ABS statistics, so I'm not making this up either. If you look at the trend line from 1984 to where we are today, look at that trend. Now, sure, it's gone up, and sure, the government might say they're going to drop it a little bit in recent years. Still, that's not enough. It needs to be like 50 to 100,000, this immigration number. It needs to be like quartered or a fifth of what it is. But anyway, this is where it's going. It's actually pretty scary, like, for the Australian public. It's not very good for us. So, look, this is where we're going. I cannot believe I even have to say this, because, like, people do not press them on these issues. I don't know how people vote for governments that continue to do this. And it's not even, I'm telling you right now, it's not even just the Labor Party or the Greens. It's also, it's not all of them, but it's some parts of the Liberal Party as well are continuing to try to do this. I can't, like, it's not popular with everyone, but the last person I can think who tried to get this under wraps was Tony Abbott. It's the last one I can think of who really tried to get this under wraps. But anyway, that's where we're going. And it's not really a good thing. So it's actually, most of what they're doing, aside from what I mentioned with someone like Chris Minns, has been just this ridiculous mass immigration, stupid policy thing going down. So hopefully some more of these premiers, and hopefully we can get a change of government to actually start to fix this in the long term, because it's not going in the right direction, people. We really need to fix this thing in the large part of what's going on.